In this episode, I'm going to respond to some calls from Joe and Jason. I'm going to talk some about old school RPG dungeons and how it relates to encumbrance and supplies and inventory. And finally, I'm going to talk a little more about the Tales of the Dragon Slayers, my party first level party that slayed a dragon and the problems that have since ensued and the world they find themselves in. That'll be at the end. So if you're interested in that has run out after the part about uh, old school dungeons, you can tune right out. But thank you for listening to however much you listen to.
Hey, Pink Phantom, it's me again. Super interesting episode about letting the dice tell the story. As far as world building goes, I've never really done that, though I am experimenting with it now because I got the sandbox generator PDF that Jason of Nerds RPG Variety Cast talked about on his show, and I absolutely love it. So I've been doing some world building with that, and that's been a huge fun. But before that, the only experience I ever had with letting the dice tell the story was almost a random table in reverse. Back when I was doing the actual play, the Wheeler Woe show, a bunch of the podcast actual plays back then would post this thing on Twitter where it'd be like, for every like, I'll tell you one fact about the world. And so I thought I would do that one day. And that thing ended up getting like 116 likes, I think. And so I just kept having to come up with all these new facts about the world. And it was the coolest world building exercise I've ever done. That world now is so, I don't want to say fleshed out, but there are so many points of interest scattered all over that whole world now that I had no idea of before I did that little writing world building test. And yeah, so that was kind of like letting the dice tell the story, but instead of rolling on the random table, other people were rolling and I was the random table. So I don't know, it's just weird. Wanted to tell you that story. Anyway, man, take it easy. Peace out.
Thanks for the call, Joe. That was a great story, and you may have hit upon the perfect definition of old school game master. What an old school game master is, a random thought dispenser. But yeah, I can see exactly how Twitter could work also as a random generator by just people pitching you questions you weren't expecting and getting your mind to stretch a little more and answering those questions and looking for ways to generate them that can lead you to techniques and tools that can help you far down the road. And I'm glad you're enjoying that sandbox generator. I've been kind of digging into it a little bit myself. I haven't dug too deeply into it, but it's something that's definitely very exciting for anyone who's interested. It's called the Sandbox Generator by Atelier Clandestine. I think that's how you say that. I'm not sure. I do have a link to that product on Drive Through RPG in the show notes. And if you would like to benefit from the random thought generator that is Joe Richter, you can do so, start doing so by listening to him on Hindsightless, his podcast. A link to that is also in the show notes.
Hey, Jason here. Just want to say enjoyed your latest episode. I think 41 maybe. Um, as far as letting the dice create the story, sometimes I personally I like to riff off what my players are doing, but there are definitely times when you're building that world and you're building that setting out for your players to go play in that you've got to come up with ideas and you've got to come up with motivations and all that. And yeah, doing some dice rolling and riffing off that is a great way to do it. I mean, that's why in the OSR we love so many random tables, right? I mean, look at Nave. There are a lot of people that are back in the Nave 2 Kickstarter because of random tables, not so much they love the Nave mechanics. Um, and we have books and books and books that are just random tables. So, yeah, what's the use of random tables if you're not going to riff off them?
Thanks for the call, Jason. Yeah, that is why we collect all those random tables, probably in the old school style. Something to stimulate the mind and combine with what we already know about our world and or the world that we're playing the game in, and combine it with just some ideas that may take you in a direction that you didn't know and make you ask questions. because that's a lot of where you get your world building in is asking questions. And sometimes you just don't know the right questions to ask. You have an idea about a piece here, a piece there. Maybe you know how to put them together, maybe you don't. But there's other pieces that you don't know, and some of it in a game you're going to make up on the spot, and you that's one of the sort of rulings, not rules, aspects of the game. But then other times you need to figure something out a little bit ahead of time, or something occurs and you need to figure out where things might be able to go from this if it goes this direction or this direction, and having those random tables and just having that intellectual stimulation to get the juices flowing. It's something I've been enjoying a lot lately. So thank you for the call, and if y'all would like to hear more insights like this from Jason, you can listen in to his podcast, the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. The link is in the show notes. So some hobby thoughts I've had over the past week. The first thing is I actually streamed the D&D movie over this past week. I found it enjoyable. I really liked it. I even got a little choked up at the end. I thought it was well put together movie. Thought it moved along pretty well. I mean, it wasn't anything. If you're looking for something that's off the beaten path, or it's something that's going to create something new, it's an action movie set in a fantasy magic setting, using D&D backdrops from the D&D settings, mainly the Forgotten Realms. But there were also some little things in there for long-time D&D fans, even D&D media fans. There was a nice little inclusion in there of some little NPCs, if you will, that you glimpsed a couple of times during the course of the episode. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good. So good on you, Wizards of the Coast, for that. Another thing I've been thinking about this week, I've been spending a lot of time with the random dungeon generators in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Manual. And as I've been doing it, I've been thinking, wow, Gary really liked corridors and empty rooms, because you rolling on those, you can get a lot of corridors and a lot of empty rooms. But I got to thinking, it makes sense that it would be that way, because coming from that wargaming background, using that old school style of play like Gary Gygax did, that is leaning into the logistical side of exploring a dungeon, of having an adventure in a fantasy realm where you're going out into the unknown, and you have to have supplies. You have to be able to sustain yourself as you go. And how long can you go? And some of that, how far can you go, has to do with the personal abilities of the characters. How many hit points do you have? What kind of weapons do you have? What kind of spells have you memorized? That kind of thing. That's one of the reasons why spells are fire and forget in old school D&D, because it's a depleting resource. And then you have other resources like torches and rations that are consumed over time. The more time you spend away from civilization, the less and less you have to work with, unless you can find a way to live off the land. And then you have to return before those resources are expended. Otherwise, you may find yourself in a dire situation. And so it would make sense that in that old school style, you would generate a lot of corridors and a lot of empty rooms, because if the characters are being very, very careful, it takes time to explore. It takes a full turn to explore a small section of corridor or a small room, because you're looking for traps, and you're looking for treasure, you're looking for secret doors, and you're trying to find all these things that might be hidden or might be deceptive. But if you do that all the time, then you find yourself running out of time. And then you have to leave and return. And by then, any obstacles you've overcome, or any monsters that you've overcome, may have essentially replenished. So it's a living world. It's something that is always in motion, and you need to take advantage of your opportunities when you get it. So sometimes you have to make choices. And time is a consumable, just like torches, just like rations, just like arrows, just like spells. And some of the more modern games have tried to do is do away with some of the things that have to do with inventory, or simplify them a lot. And they've tried to greatly reduce how you deal with encumbrance. A lot of you listen to the people who create a lot of the newer systems and people who play them and enjoy them. They're not a big fans of encumbrance. But again, encumbrance that feeds into that logistical part. You can only carry so much. If you're going to carry 50 feet of rope so that you can get up or down a place where there are no stairs or that you can climb out of a pit, then you can't carry as many rations with you. If you take a 10-foot pole with you, that takes up room that otherwise you might add a few more torches so you can spend more time underground. So it's about making choices, and it's about using the tools you have wisely. It's about using what you find. Maybe you'll come across an adventuring party that didn't get out of the dungeon in time, and they'll have some torches on them. Then you can stay longer. So you have to decide what do you have to take, what would you like to take, what can you maybe find along the way or create along the way if you're in a game or a system or a group that uses crafting, which is a more modern concept as well. So that was really kind of my epiphany, I guess, of the week was Gary liked empty rooms and corridors, and it makes sense that he did. I'm going to finish up with a couple of things I have to add in my ongoing world of my Dragon Slayers. The first thing is just a correction I kept referring to during the battle, and I think maybe even in some occasions afterwards, of Bernie Keebler as a fighter cleric thief. He's a fighter magic user thief. There is no fighter cleric thief in first edition AD&D, so that's a mistake on my part. It doesn't really make a difference. It wouldn't have changed any outcomes or anything, so we're fine there because all he basically did was swing a sword. The other thing is, what will the characters do next? They're got to figure out what they're going to do with all this loot. And so I've just tried to think about who these characters are and what they're going to do and what their situation is. The first thing I was actually going to do was going to check to see if maybe the mercenaries or the valets would take off at this point, maybe grab some loot and take off in the night. But the loyalty is so high, the factors for loyalty are so high that there's no chance of them really doing that. There's literally no chance of the mercenaries doing it. There's 100% loyalty, base loyalty, and the valets, there'd be a small percent chance, but if you factor in something that's not really listed among all the factors to add percentages, will that they would be alone in the wilderness if they took off. They're not going to go anywhere either. But what will the party do? And of course, this is sort of the thing about solo gaming with a party is you have to figure out how the dynamics are going to work by yourself. It's not a case of the party, a multi-person party, talking to each other and talking it through and coming to a conclusion like a party would. So I think the first thing is, how likely are they to stay put? Because you have a situation where they've come into the dragon lair and there are these eggs. And so that could mean that there's a second dragon, which would mean they might want to get everything out of there and get away from there because the dragon might come back. And there's also the matter of, will someone notice, and are the dragon eggs of different types? Because there were two dragons living there at different occasions. So the first thing I want to do is figure out, are the dragons of the same type or different types? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to roll a couple percentages, and if I'm going to say it's 25% likely that that there's one of each. It's 25% likely that they're both red dragon, and it's 50% likely they're both gold dragon because the gold dragon was there longer. So from 1 through 25, it's one of each. From 26 through 50, they're both red, and if it's above 50%, they're both gold. And it's 12%, so it's one of each. So now the question is, will the party know that it's two different types of eggs and that there was a second dragon there? They may suspect it. Now, Edgar has an animal lore non-weapon proficiency. So if he rolls beneath his intelligence, because that's the score used for that, then he will know A, that there was a second dragon present at some point, and B, that the dragon eggs are different. So we're going to roll. He's an 18 intelligence, so he's got a pretty good chance. So does he know that there were 2 dragons there? Yes, he knows that there were 2 dragons at that lair. Does he know that it was 2 different types of dragons because it's 2 different types of dragon eggs? And with a 14, yes, he does. So now they know there's a chance of a second dragon being there and that it could come back. So they're probably more likely to try to move the treasure and, well, to move the treasure as part of their next steps. But what are their next steps overall? Well, Sir Gus and Katya both knew Bernie Keebler. So they're likely to try to get him resurrected. They have treasure, so they could certainly donate to a temple for the service, but that would require leaving the lair. That would require even going further back than the fort, which is sort of the outpost in this kind of wilderness where the dragon was lairing. And they'd have to go quite a distance to do that, which would leave more opportunities for, of course, the loot to be raided if they were there. And the other thing is, what should they do with the treasure? So my thoughts here are that Sir Gus believes they should return to town so they can get their friends resurrected and move and further than town, and that they should admit that they slew the dragon and that they found the treasure, because that's who he is. Katya believes that they should return to town, but they shouldn't say that they slayed the dragon, just that maybe they found the lair and were actually able to get some of the treasure, which is how they have treasure where they could go for the resurrection, but that they didn't slay the dragon because that will kind of keep others from maybe looking for the dragon. Cudgel believes that they shouldn't tell anyone they found the lair, that they should hide any wealth they take with them, but that they should claim they slew the dragon. They should take, some trophies so that they can prove that they did, because he's looking to kind of boost his reputation. And Edgar, the druid, believes that they shouldn't admit they slew the dragon, and they shouldn't admit they found the treasure, that they should just say, found the lair, so that, maybe they encountered the dragon, because obviously they're beat up and their party members are dead, but they found him in the open. So those are their positions if they go to town. Cudgel and Edgar would prefer to first stash the loot in a nearby cave, to find a nearby cave, make sure there's nothing living there, and move it, because they can move it more quickly. Sir Gus and Katya both think that they should go back to that keep they encountered, even though it's a few days' drive away, and make several trips and take the treasure there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a roll for the convincing and for how convinced they will be. So for the convincing, I'm going to roll percentile dice and add their charisma modifiers and see, how well do they convince someone. I'm going to use the reaction tables that you use for when you're encountering creatures to see, how positive or negative a result you have. In terms of how well you could be convinced, I'm going to roll an ability check, and I'm going to compare that roll to basically the 3 intellectual abilities, for lack of a better term. Intelligence, because you're listening to the argument, the logic of the argument. Wisdom, because you're trying to figure out common sense wise the argument. And then charisma, because you're trying to maybe resist the influence of the person themselves and not just listen to their argument. So first we're going to do the charisma rolls. So Sir Gus, on his attempt to convince, his reaction roll, he's got a 17 charisma, so he's got a plus 30% on this roll, and it is a 15. So 15 plus 30, 45%. And then Katya, she has a plus 35% with an 18, but she only rolled an 8. So she has a total of 43%. Cudgel, he has a charisma of 14. He only has plus 10%, but he rolls a 98. So he is 108%. And then finally, Edgar, who is a 15 charisma, he has plus 15%, and he rolls a 36. So he is at 51%. Now, how likely are they to be convinced? Sir Gus has a intelligence of 9, wisdom of 13, charisma of 17, and he rolls a 19. So he fails all the way around the board. He's susceptible to being convinced. Katya has a intelligence of 17, wisdom of 17, charisma of 18, and she rolled a 20. So she is very susceptible to being convinced. Cudgel has a intelligence of 18, a wisdom of 6, and a charisma of 14. He rolls an 8. So he is mostly not susceptible to being convinced. And then finally, Edgar, with intelligence 18, wisdom 16, charisma 15, rolls an 11. So he is not susceptible to being convinced at all. So the two PCs that want to remain and who are also prefer to store their loot in a nearby cave, they have proven to be the most convincing. And the other two have proven not to be convincing and to being prone to being convinced. So if they can find a cave, which is the other question, can they find an appropriate cave nearby that using just the horses probably to get there versus using the horses in the wagon to make several trips to the keep, is there something available? So I'm going to say there's a chance of an appropriate cave being in the area is about 50% because they are in some kind of craggy hills. For it to have horse access where they're not having to just hoof it to get to the cave, which would take forever to carry all the loot, is about 40%. And then to be able to get there with a wagon to find some kind of a trail it can travel on is about 25%. So here we go. And with a 77%, they can't find an appropriate cave nearby. So now there's the question of how long are they going to be doing this? I've been working through where they started, how they got there, and one day I can go through that if people are interested. But the keep that they had explored a little bit of is about 3 days' journey away with fully laden horses and wagons. They could get there a little faster if they weren't carrying as much. So they're going to, right now, they're waiting for, it's going to take a week for Cudgel and Katya to recover enough to be able to cast spells again, to figure out what the magic items are, because they need to kind of prioritize those. But in between, they could have some people make a trip to take some treasure back to that keep and maybe take some measures to explore around a little and find an appropriate spot for it. They do know there are some places that I've rolled up that would be appropriate spots where they could store some loot. So Sir Cudgel and one of the mercenaries and their valets are going to take a load of treasure back to that keep and find a nice equipment closet or something to stash it in while they wait for their magic users to recover and be able to help identify and check out what's the most valuable magic items among the things that they found in the Dragon's Lair. So that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. And that's it for this episode of Phantom Thoughts. I love feedback. If you would like to comment, there's lots of different ways for you to do it. First, you can go to podcasters.spotify.com anchor.fm/pod/show/phantom thoughts and leave a voice message. Or you can send an email or attach a voice message to an email and send it to phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. You can call into my Google Voice line at 864-209-1441. You can send me a message on SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantomthoughts. You can also contact me on Discord. I am the Pink Phantom number 9782. So please let me hear from you. Thank you for listening and have a good day. Links to contact information and topics covered in this podcast can be found in the show notes. The opening music for this episode was Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Goodbye.